My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 72 years old, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. But here I am, sitting in my small apartment in Pinewood Acres, a retirement community, as they like to call it, though I prefer to think of it as the place where they put you when your family doesn't know what else to do with you. It all started 3 months ago. I had an appointment at the Westbrook Medical Clinic for my arthritis. Nothing serious, just a regular checkup with Dr. Patel, who's been treating me for the past 5 years. My son, Garrett, promised he'd pick me up afterward. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll be there at 3:30 sharp." I believed him. That was my first mistake. The appointment went fine. Dr. Patel said my condition wasn't getting worse, which at my age is as good as it gets. I sat in the waiting room afterward, my purse on my lap, watching the minutes tick by on the large wall clock. 3:30 came and went, then 3:45, then 4:00. I called Garrett's cell phone 3 times, straight to voicemail. I texted him. No response. By 4:30, the receptionist, Marjorie, a kind woman with dyed red hair and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck, started giving me concerned looks. "Everything all right, Mrs. Bowers Whitfield?" she asked. I nodded and smiled, though inside I felt a familiar ache. The ache of being forgotten, of being an afterthought in my own son's life. At 5, Marjorie approached me again. "Mrs. Whitfield, we're closing soon. Is there someone else you can call?" I shook my head. My daughter Vanessa lived in Oregon. My husband Richard had been dead for 8 years. And my friends, well, at my age, friends become fewer every year. "I'll call an Uber," I said, fumbling with my phone. Marjorie offered to help, but I waved her away. "I may be old, but I know how to use a smartphone," I told her. That was my second mistake. The Uber driver who picked me up was named Khalid. He was a young man, probably in his 30s, with kind eyes and a neat beard. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. I gave him Garrett's address in Oakwood Heights. It was a 40-minute drive, but I had nowhere else to go. My own house had been sold after Richard died. Garrett had insisted I couldn't live alone anymore. "It's for your own good, Mom," he'd said. Another mistake, believing him. As Khalid drove, I stared out the window at the passing scenery. The trees were just starting to turn, hints of gold and red among the green. Fall had always been Richard's favorite season. "Nature's last hurrah before the sleep," he used to say. I missed him terribly in that moment. He would never have forgotten me at a doctor's appointment. "Everything okay back there?" Khalid asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. I realized I'd been sighing without knowing it. "Just tired," I said, but the truth was, I was more than tired. I was angry. And beneath the anger was something else, a determination I hadn't felt in years. When we pulled up to Garrett's house, a large 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn, I asked Khalid to wait. "I just need to check if anyone's home," I explained. I rang the doorbell. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I peered through the side window. The house was dark. No one was home. I returned to the car, a strange calm settling over me. "Change of plans," I told Khalid. "Do you know how to get to Pinewood Acres?" He nodded. "The retirement community." "Sure." As we drove away from Garrett's empty house, I made a decision. It was time to stop being forgotten. Time to remind my son, and maybe myself, that I was still here, still alive, still capable. Little did I know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Not just for me, but for my entire family. Because what I discovered when I finally made it home that night would turn my world upside down. Khalid dropped me off at Pinewood Acres just as the sun was setting. The building looked the same as always, a sprawling, single-story structure with beige siding and a sign out front that read, "Where golden years truly shine." Richard would have hated it. He always said that euphemisms for old age were just ways for younger people to avoid thinking about their own mortality. I paid Khalid, adding a generous tip. He seemed surprised. "Are you sure, ma'am?" he asked. I nodded. "You've been kind," I said, "and kindness should be rewarded." He smiled and handed me his card. "If you ever need a ride again, call me directly. Skip the app." I tucked the card into my purse, not knowing how important that small gesture would become. The lobby of Pinewood Acres was quiet. Meredith, the evening receptionist, looked up from her computer with surprise. "Mrs. Whitfield, we were worried about you. Nurse Jenkins said you had an appointment today, but when you didn't come back for dinner." She trailed off, her eyes questioning. I waved away her concern. "My son forgot to pick me up," I said simply. I took an Uber home. Meredith's face softened with pity, which only stoked my anger. I didn't want pity, I wanted respect. "Well, I'm glad you're back safe," she said. "Should I call the kitchen to send something to your room?" I shook my head. "I'm not hungry." Another lie. I was starving, but I couldn't bear the thought of eating alone in my room while everyone else had finished their communal dinner hours ago. My apartment, Unit 117, was at the end of the East Wing. I called it an apartment, but it was really just a bedroom with an attached bathroom and a small sitting area. The walls were painted a pale yellow that was supposed to be cheerful, but always reminded me of illness. Richard's old armchair sat in the corner, the only piece of furniture I'd been allowed to bring from our home. Everything else had been sold or given away. I sat in that chair now, not bothering to turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text message from Garrett. "Mum, I'm so sorry. Got caught up in a meeting." "Everything okay?" No mention of the doctor's appointment, no acknowledgement that he'd left his elderly mother stranded for hours. Just a casual apology, as if he'd merely forgotten to pick up milk from the store. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the drawer in the small table beside the chair. Inside was a key, the spare key to my old house. The house that, according to Garrett, had been sold 2 years ago to a young couple with a baby on the way. The house where Richard and I had raised our children, celebrated holidays, built a life. The house that, according to the property records I'd secretly looked up online last month, was still in my name. That was Garrett's biggest mistake, assuming I wouldn't check, assuming I was too old, too trusting, too diminished to question what he told me. But I had checked, and what I found had shaken me to my core. The house hadn't been sold. The money hadn't gone into a trust for my care, as Garrett had claimed. Instead, he'd been renting it out and pocketing the income while paying the minimum for my stay at Pinewood Acres. I clutched the key tightly, feeling its edges dig into my palm. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would call Khalid and ask him to take me to my real home. I would see for myself what had become of it, and then I would decide what to do about my son's betrayal. As I sat there in the darkness, a soft knock came at my door. I didn't answer at first, hoping whoever it was would go away. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. With a sigh, I got up and opened the door. Standing there was Iris Blackwood, my neighbor from Unit 119. At 80, Iris was older than me, but moved with the energy of someone decades younger. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and she wore bright red lipstick that matched her cardigan. "I heard you had quite the adventure today," she said, holding up a paper bag. "I saved you a dinner roll and some apple pie from the cafeteria." Despite myself, I smiled. Iris was the closest thing I had to a friend at Pinewood Acres. She'd moved in 6 months before me, after her husband died of a stroke. Unlike me, she'd chosen to come here. "My children wanted me to live with them," she'd told me once, "but I'd rather die than be a burden." I'd nodded in agreement, though the truth was, I would have given anything to have been given that choice. I stepped aside to let her in. It wasn't an adventure, I said as she placed the food on my small kitchenette counter. It was a reminder. Iris raised an eyebrow. A reminder of what? I hesitated, then decided to trust her. A reminder that I'm still alive, I said, and that it's time I started acting like it. Iris studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Well, it's about damn time, she said. And for the first time that day, I laughed. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the events of the day, but also racing forward to what I might do next. By the time dawn broke, casting a pale light through my thin curtains, I had made up my mind. I was going home, my real home, and I was going to find out exactly what Garrett had been doing. I dressed carefully, choosing a blue blouse that Richard had always liked and a pair of comfortable slacks. I applied a touch of lipstick and brushed my silver hair until it shone. If I was going to reclaim my life, I wanted to look the part. At breakfast in the communal dining room, Iris joined me at my usual table by the window. "You look different today," she observed, stirring cream into her coffee. "Like you've made a decision." I smiled thinly. "I have," I admitted, "and I could use your help." I explained my plan. I would tell the staff I was spending the day with a friend, then call Khalid to drive me to my old house. "I need to see it for myself," I said. "I need to know what Garrett's been doing." Iris listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'll cover for you," she promised. "But be careful, Eleanor. If what you suspect is true, your son has a lot to lose." That was an understatement. Garrett was a financial advisor with a reputation to protect. If word got out that he'd essentially stolen his mother's house and lied about it, his career would be over. Part of me, a small, vindictive part I wasn't proud of, relished that possibility. But another part still remembered the little boy who'd once brought me dandelions from the yard, his small face beaming with pride. I called Khalid at 10 a.m. and he arrived at Pinewood Acres 30 minutes later. Iris walked me to the front entrance, where we performed a little charade for Meredith's benefit. "We'll be back by dinner," Iris told her cheerfully. "Just a little shopping trip." Meredith smiled and waved us off, not bothering to check if we'd signed out properly. Another reminder of how invisible we'd become. Once outside, Iris hugged me tightly. "Call me if you need anything," she whispered, "and remember, Eleanor, you're stronger than you think." I nodded, suddenly too emotional to speak. Then I climbed into Khalid's car and gave him the address, my address on Maple Street. The drive took us through familiar neighborhoods, past the park where I used to take Garrett and Vanessa to play, past the grocery store where I'd shopped for 30 years, past the church where Richard and I had renewed our vows on our 40th anniversary. Each landmark was a stitch in the fabric of my life, a life that had been taken from me under the guise of care. "You're quiet today," Khalid observed as we turned onto Maple Street. I realized I hadn't spoken since giving him the address. "Just lost in memories," I said. "I used to live here." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Going to visit old neighbors?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm going home." Before he could ask what I meant, we pulled up in front of the house. My house. It looked different than I remembered. The blue paint had been replaced with a trendy grey. The oak tree Richard had planted when Garrett was born had grown massive, its branches now shading most of the front yard. But the porch swing was still there, and the stained glass panel in the front door that we'd found at an antique shop in Vermont. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Khalid turned to look at me, concern in his eyes. "Are you sure you're okay, ma'am? Do you want me to wait?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please. Just for a little while. I'm not sure what I'll find." I approached the house slowly, my heart pounding. The garden was well maintained, but different. The roses I'd lovingly tended had been replaced with low-maintenance shrubs, A child's bicycle lay on its side in the driveway. So there were tenants, just as I'd suspected. I wondered what Garrett had told them about the owner of the house. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the 3 steps to the porch and inserted my key into the lock. It still fit. I turned it slowly, half expecting it not to work, but the door swung open with the same slight creak it had always had. I stepped inside. The entryway was as I remembered it, with the same hardwood floors and the small table where I used to leave my keys. But the walls had been painted, and the family photos that had once lined the hallway were gone, replaced with generic artwork. I moved further into the house, into the living room where Richard and I had spent countless evenings reading or watching TV. The furniture was different, modern, sleek pieces that I would never have chosen. But the built-in bookshelves Richard had crafted still lined the far wall, now filled with books that weren't ours. I ran my fingers along the shelf, where a notch marked the spot where Vanessa had once thrown a toy car in a tantrum. The memory made me smile despite everything. I continued through the house, taking in the changes, but also noting what remained the same. The kitchen had been updated with new appliances, but the height marks for Garrett and Vanessa still faintly showed on the door frame, despite attempts to paint over them. The back porch still had the wind chimes Richard had hung, though they were silent now in the still air. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Tenants returning home? Or had someone, a neighbor perhaps, noticed an elderly woman entering the house and called the police? Or worse, called Garrett? I quickened my pace, determined to see the rest of the house before I was discovered. The master bedroom, my bedroom, was at the end of the hall. I pushed open the door and froze. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was untouched. My floral bedspread still covered the bed. Richard's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. The photographs of our family still hung on the walls. It was as if time had stopped in this one room, preserved exactly as we had left it, and then I understood. This room wasn't part of the rental. Garrett had kept it locked away, a shrine to the parents he claimed to love but had betrayed. Or perhaps it was something else, a reminder of his guilt, a space he couldn't bear to change because doing so would make his deception complete. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bed, and felt tears begin to fall, not tears of sadness but of rage. How dare he? How dare he take my home, my independence, my dignity, and then preserve this room as if it somehow made up for what he'd done? I heard the front door open downstairs, followed by footsteps in the entryway. A woman's voice called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" I didn't move. Let them find me. Let them call Garrett. Let this charade finally end. The footsteps came up the stairs, hesitant at first, then more determined. A moment later, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She was pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She stared at me in confusion. "Who are you?" she asked. "How did you get in here?" I stood up, straightening my shoulders. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield," I said, "and this is my house." The young woman's name was Tessa Langley. She was 28, 7 months pregnant with her first child, and had been renting my house with her husband Marcus for the past 18 months. As we sat in what used to be my kitchen, now painted a cheerful yellow with white cabinets, she told me how they'd found the place. "It was perfect for us," she said, pushing a mug of tea across the table to me. "The rent was below market, and the owner—" She stopped, her eyes widening as she made the connection. "Garrett Whitfield. He's your son, isn't he?" I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Yes, and he told me this house had been sold 2 years ago, that the money was in a trust for my care." I didn't add that Garrett had also convinced me I couldn't live alone anymore, that Pinewood Acres was the only option. Some humiliations were too painful to share with a stranger. Tessa's expression shifted from confusion to anger. That's horrible, she said. We had no idea. He told us the house belonged to his family, but that they'd moved away. He never mentioned you at all. She bit her lip, looking around the kitchen as if seeing it differently now. We would never have agreed to rent it if we'd known. I believed her. There was an openness to Tessa's face, a genuine distress at discovering she was living in a stolen home. It's not your fault, I assured her. You couldn't have known. I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. How much rent do you pay? I asked finally. Tessa hesitated, then named a figure that made me gasp. It was nearly triple what my monthly fee at Pinewood Acres cost. For 18 months, Garrett had been pocketing the difference. Thousands of dollars that should have been mine. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the money, but because of what it revealed about how my son saw me, as a resource to be exploited, not a parent to be honored. I don't know what to say, Tessa murmured, her hand moving to her belly in that protective gesture again. What are you going to do? It was a good question. What was I going to do? I could call a lawyer, report Garrett for elder abuse and fraud. I could demand the house back, forcing Tessa and Marcus to find somewhere else to live, just as they were about to become parents. I could confront Garrett directly, watch him squirm as he tried to explain away his actions. But as I looked at Tessa, young, vulnerable, her whole life ahead of her, I realized that none of those options felt right. This wasn't just about justice or revenge. It was about reclaiming my agency, my dignity. And dignity didn't come from hurting others, even those who might deserve it. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I won't do anything that puts you and your husband at risk. You have my word on that. The relief on Tessa's face was palpable. Thank you, she whispered. We've been saving for a down payment on our own place, but with the baby coming. She trailed off, and I nodded in understanding. The timing couldn't be worse for them to lose their home. We talked for another hour. Tessa showed me the nursery they'd set up in what used to be Vanessa's room. The walls now painted a soft green with a mural of woodland creatures. She told me about Marcus, who worked as an elementary school teacher, and their plans for the future. In return, I shared stories about raising my own children in this house, about Richard and our life together. It felt good to talk about those memories, to bring them into the light instead of keeping them locked away, like Garrett had done with the master bedroom. As the afternoon wore on, I realized I needed to get back to Pinewood Acres before anyone realized I was missing. I called Khalid, who had waited patiently all this time, and asked him to pick me up. Before I left, I exchanged phone numbers with Tessa. I'll be in touch, I promised, once I decide what to do. In the car, Khalid was tactfully silent, sensing my need to process everything I'd learned. But as we neared Pinewood Acres, he spoke up. Mrs. Whitfield, he said hesitantly, I couldn't help overhearing some of what happened back there. If you need a witness, someone to confirm you were at that house today, I'd be happy to help. His offer touched me deeply. Thank you, Khalid, I said. I may take you up on that. I paused, then added, and please call me Eleanor. He smiled at me in the rearview mirror. Eleanor, he repeated. It's a beautiful name. It means bright, shining one in Greek. I hadn't known that. Richard had chosen the name for our daughter because it was his grandmother's, but the meaning seemed fitting now. After years of dimming myself to accommodate others, I was ready to shine again. Iris was waiting for me in the lobby when I returned, her face lighting up with relief when she saw me. Thank goodness, she said, pulling me into a quick hug. I was starting to worry. She led me to her apartment where we could talk privately. Tell me everything, she demanded once the door was closed. So I did. I told her about the house, about Tessa and the baby, about the master bedroom preserved like a museum exhibit. I told her about the rent Garrett had been collecting, about the lies he'd told both me and the young couple. And finally, I told her about my uncertainty over what to do next. Iris listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly outraged. When I finished, she stood up and paced the small room, her energy barely contained. "That son of a bitch," she muttered. "Pardon my French, Eleanor, but there's no other way to put it. What he did to you, it's criminal." "I know," I said quietly, "but it's also complicated. He's still my son." Iris stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes softening. "Yes, he is. And that's what makes this so painful." She sat down beside me on the sofa. "But Eleanor, you can't let him get away with this. Not just for your sake, but for his. What kind of man steals from his own mother? What kind of example is he setting for his children?" She was right, of course. By allowing Garrett's deception to continue, I would be enabling behavior that went against everything Richard and I had tried to teach our children. But confronting him meant facing not just his betrayal, but my own failures as a parent. Where had I gone wrong? What had I missed that allowed my son to become someone who could do this? "I need to think," I told Iris. "I need to be sure about what I want before I do anything." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, but don't take too long. That young couple deserves to know where they stand, and so do you." As I walked back to my own apartment, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I was making my own decisions, charting my own course. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. And that, I realized, was a victory in itself. But when I opened my door, that sense of calm shattered. Sitting in Richard's armchair, his face tight with anger, was Garrett. "Hello, Mother," he said coldly. "I think we need to talk." "How did you get in here?" I demanded, closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, but I was determined not to show fear. This was my space, small as it was, and he had invaded it without permission. Garrett stood up, towering over me. At 45, he looked more like his father than ever, the same broad shoulders, the same cleft in his chin. But Richard's eyes had been kind. Garrett's were hard, calculating. "I'm listed as your emergency contact," he said. "The staff let me in when I told them I was worried about you." He took a step toward me. "What were you doing at the house, Mom?" So Tessa or Marcus had called him. I couldn't blame them. Finding an elderly woman in your rented home, claiming to be the real owner, would unsettle anyone. "I was visiting my property," I said evenly. "The property you told me had been sold." Garrett's jaw tightened. "You're confused," he said, his tone patronizing. "We did sell the house. The money is in a trust for your care, just like I told you." He was lying to my face even now. The realization was like a physical blow. "Stop it," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Stop lying to me. I spoke with the tenants, Garrett. I know you've been renting out my house for 18 months. I know how much they pay you." I moved to the small table by Richard's chair and picked up my phone. "I have proof. Property records showing the house is still in my name. Bank statements showing the rental income going into your account." Garrett's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. "You're not well, Mom," he said, switching tactics. "You're having delusions again. Remember last year when you thought the nurses were stealing your jewelry? We had to explain to you that you'd given your pearls to Vanessa for her wedding. I had given Vanessa my pearls, but that had been a conscious choice, not a delusion. This was gaslighting, pure and simple." "I'm perfectly well," I said, "and I want my house back." Garrett laughed, a cold sound that held no humor. "And what would you do with it? Live there alone? You can barely take care of yourself here with staff to help you. You'd be dead within a month." He shook his head, as if disappointed in a child. "This is why we had to make decisions for you, Mom. You're not rational anymore." His words stung because they played on my deepest fears, that I was diminished, incapable, a burden. But I thought of Iris's words, "You're stronger than you think." And I thought of Tessa, young and vulnerable, yet facing her future with courage. If she could do it, so could I. "I took an Uber to my doctor's appointment yesterday," I said calmly, "and another one to the house today. I found my way around a neighborhood I haven't seen in 2 years. I had a long, coherent conversation with your tenant. I think I'm managing just fine." I met his gaze steadily. "The question is, how will you manage when everyone knows what you've done?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Garrett's eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice less confident now. "I mean that fraud is a crime, Garrett. Elder abuse is a crime. What you've done, lying to me, taking my home, pocketing thousands of dollars that should have been mine, those are crimes." I took a deep breath. "Unless you make this right, I'll go to the police. I'll go to your firm. I'll tell everyone what you did to your own mother." Garrett's face contorted with anger. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "You'd destroy everything, my career, my marriage, my reputation. Is that what you want? To ruin your son's life?" The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. He had taken my home, my independence, my dignity, yet he was the one claiming victimhood. "I don't want to ruin your life," I said truthfully. "I want my life back, and I want you to understand what you did wrong." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised, the child who, when caught in a lie, would hang his head in genuine remorse. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "This is ridiculous," Garrett said, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Patel. You need to have your medication adjusted." Before he could dial, there was a knock at the door. Without waiting for an answer, Iris walked in, her expression fierce. "I thought I heard voices," she said, eyeing Garrett with undisguised hostility. "Everything okay in here, Eleanor?" Garrett looked annoyed at the interruption. "This is a private conversation," he said dismissively. "Family business." Iris didn't budge. "Eleanor is my family now," she said, "and I'm not leaving her alone with someone who's trying to gaslight her." She moved to stand beside me, a small but formidable ally. Garrett looked from Iris to me, clearly reassessing the situation. He was used to dealing with me alone, isolated and uncertain. Having a witness changed the dynamic. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll continue this discussion another time when you're feeling more reasonable." He headed for the door, then paused. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Mom. Some bells can't be unrung." After he left, Iris turned to me, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right?" she asked. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "I heard raised voices from the hallway," she explained. "I was worried he might—" She trailed off, but I understood what she meant. Garrett wouldn't have physically harmed me, but emotional abuse can be just as damaging. "Thank you for coming in," I said, sinking into Richard's chair. I don't think he expected me to stand up to him. He's always been able to talk me around before. I felt drained but also strangely exhilarated. I had confronted my son, named his betrayal, and held my ground. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Iris sat on the edge of my bed, watching me thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" she asked. "He won't give up easily. Men like that never do." She was right. Garrett had too much to lose, financially and in terms of his reputation. He would fight back, perhaps by trying to have me declared incompetent, or by moving me to a facility even more isolated than Pinewood Acres. I needed to act quickly, before he could regroup. "I need to talk to Vanessa," I said, reaching for my phone. My daughter and I had drifted apart over the years, especially after she moved to Oregon. Our conversations were infrequent and superficial, limited to holiday calls and occasional updates about her children. But I needed an ally within the family, someone who could help me stand against Garrett. As I dialed her number, I wondered what she knew about the house. Had she been part of Garrett's deception? Or was she, like me, a victim of his lies. Either way, it was time for the truth to come out, time for our family's secrets to be exposed to the light. Vanessa answered on the third ring. "Mum," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything okay? You never call this late." I glanced at the clock. It was only 7:30 p.m. in New York, but Oregon was 3 hours behind. Still, her concern seemed genuine. "I need to tell you something important," I said. "It's about the house, and about your brother." Vanessa listened in stunned silence as I explained everything: the forgotten doctor's appointment, the Uber ride to the house, the discovery that Garrett had been renting it out instead of selling it as he'd claimed. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Mom," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "I had no idea. Garrett told me the house had been sold, that the money was in a trust for your care. He said it was what you wanted." Another pause. "I should have checked. I should have asked you directly. I'm so sorry." Her apology brought tears to my eyes. Unlike Garrett, Vanessa was acknowledging her part in what had happened, even if that part was simply failing to question her brother's version of events. "It's not your fault," I said. "Garrett can be very convincing when he wants to be." "But that's no excuse," Vanessa insisted. "You're my mother. I should have been more involved, more attentive." I heard her take a deep breath. "What can I do to help now?" I had thought about this carefully. "I need a lawyer," I said. "Someone who specializes in elder law. And I need you to come to New York if you can. Garrett won't listen to me, but he might listen to both of us together." "I'll book a flight tonight," Vanessa promised, "and I'll start researching lawyers right away." Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "We're going to fix this, Mom. We're going to get your house back." After we hung up, I sat with Iris in my small apartment, feeling more hopeful than I had in years. "Vanessa believes me," I told her. "She's coming to help." Iris squeezed my hand. "Good," she said. "You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone." But as the evening wore on, my optimism began to fade. What if Garrett moved against me before Vanessa arrived? What if he convinced Dr. Patel that I was having delusions, that I needed to be medicated or even hospitalized? The thought sent a chill through me. I needed to protect myself, to create a record of what was happening in case Garrett tried to silence me. "I need to write everything down," I told Iris. "Every detail, every conversation. If something happens to me, if Garrett tries to have me declared incompetent, there needs to be evidence of the truth." Iris nodded gravely. "That's smart," she said, "but you should do more than just write it down. You should record it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "My grandson gave me this for my birthday last year. Said I should use it to record my memories for the family. I never got around to it, but you can have it." I took the recorder, turning it over in my hands. "Thank you," I said. "This could make all the difference." That night, after Iris left, I sat in Richard's chair and began to speak into the recorder, starting with the day Garrett had convinced me to move to Pinewood Acres. I spoke for hours, documenting every lie, every manipulation, every moment when I had surrendered my autonomy because I trusted my son to act in my best interests. The next morning, I woke to a text from Vanessa. "Flight booked, arriving tomorrow afternoon. Found a lawyer who can meet us Thursday. Hang in there, Mom. Love you." I felt a surge of gratitude for my daughter, who was dropping everything to come to my aid. Perhaps our relationship could be rebuilt from this crisis, something good emerging from Garrett's betrayal. I had just finished breakfast when Nurse Jenkins appeared at my table. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, her expression professionally neutral. "Dr. Patel is here to see you. He'd like to do an evaluation." My heart sank. So Garrett had called him after all, just as he'd threatened. "An evaluation for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nurse Jenkins avoided my eyes. "Just a routine checkup," she said unconvincingly. He's waiting in the examination room. I considered refusing, but that would only make me appear uncooperative, possibly even paranoid. Better to face Dr. Patel directly, to demonstrate my lucidity and rationality. "All right," I said, standing up. "Let's get this over with." Dr. Patel was a small man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been my physician for 5 years, and I had always trusted him. But as I entered the examination room and saw Garrett standing beside him, that trust evaporated. This wasn't a medical visit, it was an ambush. "Mrs. Whitfield," Dr. Patel said, gesturing for me to sit on the examination table. "Your son has expressed some concerns about your cognitive function. He says you've been having delusions about your old house, that you believe it wasn't sold when in fact it was." I looked directly at Garrett, who met my gaze with a challenging stare. He thought he had the upper hand now, with a medical professional on his side. But I had been preparing for this moment all night. "Dr. Patel," I said calmly, "I'd like to speak with you alone, please. Without my son present." Garrett started to protest, but Dr. Patel held up a hand. "That's a reasonable request," he said. "Mr. Whitfield, would you mind waiting outside?" Garrett hesitated, then nodded stiffly and left the room, closing the door behind him with a bit more force than necessary. Once we were alone, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "Before you evaluate me," I said, "I'd like you to see something." I opened the property records I had saved, showing that the house on Maple Street was still in my name. Then I showed him the bank statements I had obtained, showing the rental payments going into Garrett's account. Dr. Patel studied the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said finally, "these appear to show that your son has been misrepresenting the situation regarding your house." "That's a polite way of putting it," I said. "He's been lying to me, to his sister, and apparently to you as well. He told me the house had been sold and the money put in a trust for my care. As you can see, that's not true." Dr. Patel removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is very concerning," he admitted, "but it's also outside my area of expertise. I'm here to evaluate your cognitive function, not to adjudicate a family dispute." "I understand," I said, "and I'm happy to undergo any evaluation you think is necessary. But I wanted you to know the facts first, so you could make an accurate assessment." I paused, then added, "My daughter is flying in from Oregon tomorrow. She's found a lawyer who specializes in elder law. We're meeting with him on Thursday." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "That seems like a prudent course of action." He put his glasses back on and picked up his clipboard. "Now, let's proceed with the evaluation. I'm going to ask you some standard questions to assess your memory and cognitive function." The evaluation was straightforward. Questions about the date, the president, simple math problems, recalling a list of words after a few minutes. I answered everything correctly, my mind clear and focused. When we finished, Dr. Patel made some notes on his clipboard, then looked up at me with a small smile. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "based on my evaluation, there is absolutely nothing wrong with your cognitive function. You are fully capable of making your own decisions about your living situation and your property." He hesitated, then added, "I will note this in your medical record, which may be useful if legal issues arise." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Dr. Patel," I said. "That means a lot to me." When we emerged from the examination room, Garrett was pacing in the hallway. He looked up expectantly as Dr. B. Patel approached. "Well?" he demanded. "What's your assessment?" Dr. Patel's expression remained professional, but there was a new coolness in his tone. "I've found no evidence of cognitive impairment or delusions, Mr. Whitfield. Your mother is entirely lucid and capable of making her own decisions." He glanced at me, then back at Garrett. I would suggest that you and your mother consult with appropriate legal professionals to resolve any disputes about property or finances. Garrett's face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous, he sputtered. She's clearly not thinking clearly. She took an Uber to our old house yesterday and scared the tenants half to death, claiming the place was still hers. According to the property records, Dr. Patel said mildly, the house is indeed still in your mother's name, so her claim appears to be factually correct. With that, he nodded to both of us and walked away, leaving Garrett staring after him in disbelief. For a moment, Garrett seemed at a loss for words. Then his expression hardened. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. You have no idea what you're doing, Mom. No idea at all. As he stormed off, I felt a chill run down my spine. Garrett was cornered now, and that made him dangerous. But I also felt a surge of determination. I had won this round. Dr. Patel had confirmed my competence, Vanessa was on her way, and soon we would meet with a lawyer who could help me reclaim what was rightfully mine. The battle for my house, for my independence, was just beginning. But for the first time, I believed I might actually win. Vanessa's flight arrived at JFK the next afternoon. I wanted to meet her at the airport, but Iris convinced me it would be safer to wait at Pinewood Acres. Garrett might be watching the airports, she said. Better to let Vanessa come to you. So I waited anxiously in the lobby, jumping every time the automatic doors slid open. When Vanessa finally walked in, I barely recognized her. It had been 3 years since we'd seen each other in person, and in that time, her dark hair had acquired streaks of grey, and fine lines had appeared around her eyes. But her smile was the same, warm and genuine, lighting up her whole face when she saw me. Mum, she said, dropping her suitcase and rushing to embrace me. I held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. It reminded me of when she was a little girl, when I would brush her hair before bed each night. How had we drifted so far apart? You look wonderful, I told her, stepping back to take her in. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. I look exhausted, she corrected, but it's so good to see you. Her expression grew serious. I've been doing research on the flight. What Garrett did. It's elder abuse, Mom. Financial exploitation. It's a crime in New York State. I nodded, leading her toward my apartment. I know, but he's still my son, your brother. I don't want to send him to jail. I just want my house back and... I hesitated, not sure how to express what I wanted most of all. And what, Mom? Vanessa prompted gently. And I want him to understand what he did wrong, I said finally. I want him to make amends, not just legally but morally. I want my son back. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Mom, she whispered. I don't know if that's possible. Garrett has always been different. Even as a kid, he was calculating, always looking for an angle. She squeezed my hand. But we can try. For your sake, we can try. In my apartment, I showed Vanessa everything. The property records, the bank statements, the recording I'd made detailing Garrett's deception. She listened and read with growing outrage. This is even worse than I thought, she said when I finished. He didn't just lie about selling the house. He actively manipulated you into thinking you couldn't live independently anymore. To be fair, I said, I was struggling after your father died. The house felt too big, too empty. I was lonely. I sighed, remembering those dark days after Richard's funeral. Garrett suggested I move in with him and Diane temporarily, just until I felt better. But after a few weeks, he started talking about Pinewood Acres. Said it would be better for me to be around people my own age, with medical staff on hand if I needed them. Vanessa's expression was pained. And I wasn't there to offer an alternative, she said. I was 3,000 miles away, wrapped up in my own life. She looked around the small apartment, taking in the institutional beige walls, the narrow bed, the single window overlooking the parking lot. This place is depressing, Mom. No wonder you've been unhappy here. I hadn't realized my unhappiness was so obvious. I'd tried to make the best of Pinewood Acres, to be grateful for the care I received. But the truth was, I had been slowly fading away in this place, becoming the diminished version of myself that Garrett claimed I already was. The lawyer I found specializes in cases like yours, Vanessa said, changing the subject. His name is Michael Abernathy. He's meeting us at his office tomorrow at 10 a.m. She hesitated, then added, I also called Diane. I stared at her in surprise. Garrett's wife? Why? Because I wanted to know if she was part of this, Vanessa explained, if she knew what Garrett had done. She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. She didn't. In fact, she was horrified. She thought the house had been sold too, that the money was in a trust for you. When I told her the truth, she was, well, let's just say Garrett might be sleeping on the couch for the foreseeable future. The news gave me a strange sense of relief. I had always liked Diane, had considered her more a daughter than a daughter-in-law. The thought that she might have been complicit in Garrett's deception had been painful. Is she going to confront him? I asked. Vanessa nodded. She said she would, but she also warned me that Garrett won't back down easily. He's got too much pride, too much at stake. She looked at me seriously. Mom, we need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Garrett might try to paint you as senile or unstable. He might try to turn other family members against you. Are you ready for that? I thought about it carefully. Was I ready to have my competence questioned, my character attacked? Was I ready to see my son, my firstborn, revealed as someone capable of exploiting his own mother? The prospect was daunting, but the alternative, continuing to live in this half-life, stripped of my autonomy and dignity, was worse. I'm ready, I said firmly. Whatever it takes, I want my life back. Vanessa stayed with me that night, sleeping on the small pull-out sofa in my sitting area. We talked late into the evening, catching up on the years we'd lost. She told me about her children, my grandchildren, whom I barely knew, about her work as a landscape architect, designing public parks and gardens, about her divorce 2 years ago, which she had never mentioned in our infrequent phone calls. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, hurt that she had kept something so significant from me. She looked away, embarrassed. Garrett said you were having memory issues. That stressful news upset you for days. He thought it was better not to burden you with my problems. Another lie. Another way Garrett had isolated me, controlled the information I received, shaped my reality to suit his purposes. I'm sorry, I said. Sorry that you went through that alone, and sorry that I wasn't there for you. Vanessa shook her head. It's not your fault, Mom. It's Garrett's. He manipulated all of us. She reached for my hand. But that stops now. Tomorrow, we start fighting back. The next morning, we took an Uber to Michael Abernathy's office in Midtown Manhattan. The lawyer was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with a friendly face and an air of quiet competence. He listened attentively as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided, you have a very strong case against your son. What he did constitutes financial exploitation under New York's elder abuse statutes. We could pursue criminal charges, or we could file a civil suit to recover the rental income he's collected and force him to return control of the property to you. I nodded, having expected as much. And what would that mean for Garrett? Legally, I mean. Abernathy didn't sugarcoat it. If we pursue criminal charges, he could face jail time. Even with a civil suit, his professional reputation would be severely damaged. As a financial advisor, his career is built on trust. This kind of scandal could end it. The thought made my stomach clench. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy my son's life. Is there another option? I asked. Something less devastating? Abernathy considered this. We could approach him privately first, through a formal letter outlining the evidence we have and proposing a settlement. If he agrees to return control of the house to you, pay back the rental income he's collected, and cover your legal fees, we could resolve this without going to court. And if he refuses, Vanessa asked, then we proceed with legal action, Abernathy said simply. But given the strength of your case and the potential consequences for him, I think he'll be motivated to settle. I thought about it, weighing the options. A private settlement would spare Garrett public humiliation and potential criminal charges. It would give him a chance to make amends without losing everything, but it would also allow him to avoid true accountability for what he'd done. Let's try the letter first, I decided finally. Give him one chance to do the right thing. I looked at Vanessa, who nodded in agreement. But if he refuses, we go forward with the lawsuit. No more compromises. Abernathy began drafting the letter immediately, outlining the evidence we had and the legal consequences Garrett faced if he didn't comply with our demands. As I watched him work, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. This wasn't how I had imagined my relationship with my son would end up, with lawyers and threats and documented evidence of betrayal. But perhaps it wasn't the end. Perhaps, if Garrett accepted responsibility for what he'd done, there could still be a path forward for us as a family. As we left Abernathy's office, letter in hand, Vanessa put her arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked. I nodded, though in truth I wasn't sure. "I just keep thinking about when Garrett was little," I said. "How he used to climb into my lap with a book, asking me to read to him. How did we get from there to here?" Vanessa had no answer for that. None of us did. But as we headed back to Pinewood Acres, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, with time and truth, we might find our way back to something resembling family again. The letter was delivered to Garrett's office by courier that afternoon. Abernathy had advised against sending it to his home, where Diane might intercept it. "This is between you and your son," he said. "Let him decide how much to share with his wife." Now all we could do was wait. Abernathy had given Garrett 48 hours to respond, a tight deadline designed to prevent him from stalling or developing counter-strategies. If we didn't hear back by Saturday morning, we would proceed with the lawsuit on Monday. Vanessa and I spent the day at Pinewood Acres, both too anxious to venture far. I introduced her to Iris, who took an immediate liking to my daughter. "She has your spirit," Iris told me when Vanessa stepped away to take a phone call. That same quiet strength. The observation touched me deeply. I had always seen more of Richard in Vanessa, his artistic sensibility, his thoughtfulness, but perhaps she had inherited something from me as well. By evening, we had heard nothing from Garrett. "That's actually a good sign," Abernathy said when Vanessa called to check in. "It means he's taking this seriously, consulting with his own lawyer. If he'd responded immediately, it would likely have been with anger or denial." We ordered Chinese food for dinner, eating it in my small apartment while watching an old movie on TV. It reminded me of when Vanessa was a teenager, how we would have girls' nights when Richard and Garrett were away at baseball tournaments. Those had been precious times, moments of connection that had somehow slipped away as Vanessa grew up and moved away. "I've missed this," I said softly, as the credits rolled. "Missed you." Vanessa turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've missed you too, Mom," she said. "I'm sorry I haven't been around more. After Dad died, it was just hard. Coming back to the house without him there. I understood that feeling all too well. For me, too, I admitted. Every room held memories. Sometimes it felt like I could still hear his voice, still feel his presence. I sighed, thinking of the master bedroom in my house, preserved exactly as we had left it. Maybe that's why I didn't fight harder when Garrett suggested Pinewood Acres. Part of me wanted to escape those memories. Vanessa nodded. I get that, but you shouldn't have had to give up your home, your independence. There were other options. She hesitated, then added, like coming to live with me in Oregon. The suggestion surprised me. You would have wanted that? I asked. Vanessa nodded. I still would, she said. After all this is resolved, if you don't want to go back to the house. My home is always open to you, Mom. Her offer brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. And it did. Even if I never took her up on it, knowing that I had options, that I wasn't dependent solely on Garrett's version of what was best for me, was incredibly empowering. The next morning, Vanessa's phone rang just after breakfast. It was Abernathy. Garrett's lawyer just called, he said without preamble. They want to meet, today, if possible. Vanessa put the phone on speaker so I could hear. What does that mean? I asked. Is he willing to settle? He didn't say, Abernathy replied, but the fact that he's willing to meet is promising. I suggested my office at 2 p.m. Does that work for both of you? We confirmed that it did, and Abernathy promised to call back if anything changed. After hanging up, Vanessa and I looked at each other, a mix of hope and apprehension on both our faces. This could be it, Vanessa said. He could be ready to make things right. I nodded, though I wasn't as optimistic. Garrett had never been one to admit defeat easily. Whatever he was planning, I doubted it would be a simple surrender. We arrived at Abernathy's office at 1:45 p.m., both of us dressed more formally than the day before. I had chosen a navy blue dress that Richard had always liked, with a strand of pearls, not the ones I'd given Vanessa, but a simpler set that Richard had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look strong, dignified, not like someone who could be dismissed as confused or incapable. Garrett arrived precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by a stern-looking woman in a charcoal suit who introduced herself as Patricia Donovan, his attorney. Garrett himself barely looked at me or Vanessa, his expression closed and unreadable. We all sat around Abernathy's conference table, the atmosphere tense and formal. Thank you for meeting with us, Abernathy began. I take it you've had time to review the letter and consider my client's demands. Patricia Donovan nodded curtly. We have, she said, and while my client disputes many of the characterizations in your letter, he is willing to discuss a resolution that would be satisfactory to all parties. I glanced at Garrett, who was staring fixedly at a point on the wall behind Abernathy's head. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid. This wasn't a man who had seen the error of his ways. This was a man who had been cornered and was looking for the least damaging way out. What kind of resolution did you have in mind? Abernathy asked, his tone neutral but watchful. Patricia Donovan opened a folder in front of her. My client is prepared to transfer ownership of the property on Maple Street back to Mrs. Whitfield, she said. He is also willing to pay a lump sum of $50,000 to cover any perceived financial losses. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. The rental income from the property over the past 18 months amounts to nearly $90,000, he pointed out. Your offer falls significantly short. Patricia's expression didn't change. The $50,000 takes into account the expenses Mr. Whitfield has incurred in maintaining the property, as well as the fees he paid to Pinewood Acres for his mother's care. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Fees that were far less than the rent he was collecting, I said, looking directly at Garrett for the first time. Fees for a place I never wanted to be in the first place. Garrett finally met my gaze, his eyes cold. You needed care, Mom, he said. You couldn't live alone anymore. You were forgetting things, leaving the stove on, missing appointments. That happened once, I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising within me. I left a pot on the stove one time, after your father died. I was grieving. And as for missing appointments, that's rich coming from someone who left his mother stranded at a medical clinic just 3 days ago. A flicker of something, shame, annoyance, crossed Garrett's face, but he quickly masked it. This isn't productive, Patricia interjected smoothly. We're here to reach a settlement, not rehash past grievances. Abernathy leaned forward. My client isn't interested in just financial compensation, he said. She wants an acknowledgement of the wrong that was done to her. A formal apology from her son for the deception and manipulation he subjected her to. Patricia started to speak, but Garrett cut her off. An apology, he repeated incredulously. For what? For taking care of my mother when she couldn't take care of herself? For making sure she had a safe place to live, with medical staff on hand? For managing her affairs when she was clearly incapable of doing so herself? His words stung, not just because they were cruel, but because they revealed how he truly saw me, not as a person with agency and dignity, but as a problem to be managed, a burden to be shouldered. Is that really how you see what you did? I asked quietly. As taking care of me. Garrett's expression hardened. Yes, he said flatly. That's exactly how I see it, and I'd do it again. The room fell silent. Even Patricia looked uncomfortable, shifting slightly in her seat. Vanessa, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. That's not what you did, Garrett, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. You lied to Mum. You lied to me. You took her home and her money under false pretenses. That's not caregiving. That's exploitation. Garrett turned to his sister, his expression contemptuous. Easy for you to say from 3,000 miles away, he snapped. You weren't here. You didn't see how she was after Dad died. You didn't have to deal with the daily reality of an aging parent who refuses to admit she needs help. I would have come back if I'd known, Vanessa said. If you had called me, told me what was really happening, instead of feeding me the same lies you told Mom, I would have been here. To do what? Garrett demanded. Take her to Oregon? Uproot her from everything familiar? Or maybe you would have moved back, given up your job, your life, to take care of her? I doubt it. He shook his head. No, you would have done exactly what I did, found the best solution available. The difference is, I had the courage to make the hard choice, to be the bad guy if that's what it took to keep her safe. I had heard enough. Stop it, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Both of you, stop talking about me as if I'm not here, as if I'm a problem to be solved, rather than a person with my own thoughts and feelings. I turned to Garrett. You didn't make a hard choice for my benefit. You made an easy choice for your own. You took my house and my money because you could, because you thought I was too diminished to fight back. Garrett started to protest, but I held up a hand. Let me finish, I said. I'm not denying that I struggled after your father died. I did. I was grieving, and yes, sometimes I was forgetful or distracted. But that didn't make me incapable of making my own decisions. It didn't give you the right to lie to me, to manipulate me into giving up my home and my independence. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What hurts the most isn't the money, Garrett. It's that you didn't see me as a person anymore. You saw me as a problem, a responsibility, a burden. You stopped being my son and started being my manager. And in the process, you betrayed everything your father and I taught you about honesty, about respect, about family. For the first time, Garrett seemed at a loss for words. He stared at me, his expression a complex mix of anger, defensiveness, and something else, something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. But before he could respond, Patricia Donovan intervened. This is all very emotional, she said, her tone professionally detached. But it doesn't change the legal realities. My client has made an offer. If it's not acceptable, we need to know what would be. Abernathy looked at me questioningly. I considered for a moment. then made my decision. Full ownership of the house, I said. All of the rental income Garrett has collected, minus legitimate expenses for maintenance of the property, to be verified by an independent accountant, and a formal, written apology acknowledging what he did and why it was wrong. Patricia started to shake her head, but Garrett surprised us all by speaking up. "And if I agree to those terms?" he asked. "What then? Do we go back to being a family? Do you forgive me?" There was a vulnerability in his voice that I hadn't heard in years, a hint of the boy who had once sought my approval above all else. I met his gaze steadily. "I don't know, Garrett," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something I can promise in advance. It has to be earned, and it takes time. But it would be a start, a chance to rebuild what we've lost." Garrett held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said, ignoring Patricia's look of surprise. "I'll agree to your terms, all of them." As Abernathy and Patricia began discussing the details of the settlement, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't the end of our family story, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter, one in which truth and respect would play a larger role than they had in recent years. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt truly hopeful about the future. The settlement was finalized the following week. True to his word, Garrett signed over full ownership of the house to me and agreed to repay all of the rental income he had collected, minus verified expenses for property taxes and maintenance. The total came to just over $70,000, a substantial sum that would give me financial independence for years to come. The written apology was harder for him. Abernathy had to send back 3 drafts before Garrett produced one that actually acknowledged the wrong he had done, rather than justifying his actions as necessary for my welfare. The final version was brief but sincere. "Mum, I am deeply sorry for the deception and manipulation I subjected you to regarding your house and your living situation. What I did was wrong. Not just legally, but morally. I betrayed your trust and disrespected your autonomy. While I told myself I was acting in your best interests, the truth is that I was making decisions based on what was convenient and beneficial for me, not what was truly best for you. I cannot undo the hurt I've caused, but I promise to work to rebuild your trust and to treat you with the respect and dignity you deserve. I hope that, with time, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Your son, Garrett." Reading those words, I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sadness, cautious hope. It wasn't everything I had wanted, but it was a start, a recognition at least, that what had happened was wrong and needed to be made right. The next question was what to do about the house. Tessa and Marcus had 6 months left on their lease, and I had no desire to disrupt their lives, especially with their baby due in just 2 months. After discussing it with Vanessa, I decided to honor the terms of their rental agreement, allowing them to stay until the lease expired. In the meantime, I would remain at Pinewood Acres. Not because I had to, but because I chose to, at least temporarily. "Are you sure, Mom?" Vanessa asked when I told her my decision. "You could come stay with me in Oregon while the lease runs out. Or we could find you an apartment here in New York, something nicer than Pinewood Acres." I shook my head. "I'm sure," I said. "I've made friends here, like Iris, and to be honest, I'm not ready to live alone again, not yet. I need time to adjust, to rebuild my confidence." I smiled at her concern. "Besides, now that I have my money back, I can afford some upgrades to make this place more comfortable." And that's exactly what I did. I bought a new, more comfortable bed, replaced the institutional beige curtains with ones in a cheerful floral print, added a small refrigerator and microwave so I could prepare simple meals in my room when I didn't feel like eating in the communal dining hall. Small changes, but they made Pinewood Acres feel less like a place I had been exiled to and more like a place I had chosen for myself. Vanessa stayed for another week before returning to Oregon. We spent the time reconnecting, rebuilding the relationship that had frayed over the years of distance and miscommunication. She showed me photos of her garden, of my grandchildren whom I barely knew. We made plans for me to visit in the summer, perhaps even for an extended stay. I meant what I said about you coming to live with me, she reminded me as we said goodbye at the airport. If that's what you want, there's always a place for you. I hugged her tightly, grateful for the offer, even if I wasn't ready to accept it yet. I know, I said, and that means everything to me. After Vanessa left, life settled into a new rhythm. I joined the Residents' Council at Pinewood Acres, advocating for improvements that would benefit everyone. Better food in the dining hall, more varied activities, transportation options for those who wanted to maintain connections to the wider community. To my surprise, the administration was receptive to many of our suggestions. It turned out that when you approached them as a customer with rights rather than a patient to be managed, they listened. Iris became an even closer friend, her fierce spirit and sharp wit a constant source of strength and amusement. We started a book club with several other residents, focusing on novels that challenged us intellectually and emotionally. We organized outings to museums, concerts, even a Broadway show. Slowly, Pinewood Acres began to feel less like a place where I was waiting to die, and more like a community where I was continuing to live. Garrett and I maintained a cautious distance at first. Our weekly phone calls were stilted, formal, both of us careful not to say anything that might reopen old wounds. But gradually, as the weeks passed, something began to shift. He started asking about my activities, showing genuine interest in my life at Pinewood Acres. I found myself sharing stories about the book club, about the changes I was helping to implement. And he listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't in years. 3 months after our settlement, Garrett invited me to dinner at his home. It was the first time I had seen him in person since the meeting in Abernathy's office. I was nervous as Khalid, who had become my regular driver for outings, dropped me off at the familiar address in Oakwood Heights. Diane met me at the door, her embrace warm and genuine. "Eleanor," she said, using my first name for the first time in our relationship, "I'm so glad you're here." She led me into the living room, where Garrett was waiting, looking almost as nervous as I felt. "Mum," he said, standing awkwardly. "You look well." I nodded, taking in the changes in him, the new lines around his eyes, the slight graying at his temples. "So do you," I said, though in truth he looked tired, strained. The past months had taken a toll on him, too. Dinner was a quiet affair, the conversation careful and occasionally stilted. But as we moved to the living room for coffee afterward, Garrett finally broached the subject we had been dancing around. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said abruptly, "trying to understand why I did what I did." I set down my coffee cup, surprised by his candor. "And have you? Understood, I mean." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded me painfully of Richard. "Some of it," he admitted. "I think, after Dad died, I was scared. Scared of losing you too. Scared of what that would mean for me, for our family. And instead of facing that fear, I tried to control it. To control you." He met my gaze directly. "It was wrong. I see that now." His admission touched me deeply. "Thank you for telling me that," I said softly. "It helps to know that you understand." Diane, who had been quiet until now, reached over and squeezed my hand. "We both want to make things right, Eleanor," she said, "whatever that looks like for you." As I left their house that night, I felt a cautious optimism. The breach in our family wasn't fully healed. That would take time, perhaps years. But the healing had begun, and that was more than I had dared to hope for just a few months ago. The next day, I received a call from Tessa. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, her voice excited, I wanted you to know the baby came early. A little girl. We named her Eleanor. The news brought tears to my eyes. Eleanor, I repeated, touched beyond words. That's a beautiful name. We thought so, Tessa said warmly, and we were wondering, would you like to come meet her? When you feel up to it, of course. I didn't hesitate. I'd love to, I said. How about tomorrow? And so, the next day, Khalid drove me to my old house, my house, on Maple Street. Tessa met me at the door, looking tired but radiant, the baby cradled in her arms. Come in, she said. Come meet your namesake. Little Eleanor was perfect. Tiny fingers, a wisp of dark hair, eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. As I held her, feeling her warm weight in my arms, I was struck by the continuity of life, the way it flows forward, despite our attempts to control or contain it. She's beautiful, I told Tessa and Marcus, who watched us with proud smiles. You're very blessed. We know, Marcus said, and we've been thinking about the house. He glanced at Tessa, who nodded encouragingly. We know our lease is up in a few months, and we've been saving for a down payment on our own place. But we were wondering if you might consider selling this house to us. The request surprised me. You want to buy it? I asked. Marcus nodded eagerly. We love it here, he said. It already feels like home. And now, with the baby. He trailed off, but I understood. This house, which had been the setting for my own family story, could now be the beginning of theirs. Let me think about it, I said, though in my heart I already knew my answer. This house held precious memories, but it was also a place of pain now, tainted by Garrett's betrayal. Perhaps it was time to let it go, to allow it to become a home for a new family, a new generation. A week later, after consulting with Abernathy and discussing it with Vanessa, I made my decision. I would sell the house to Tessa and Marcus at a fair price that they could afford. The proceeds, combined with the settlement from Garrett, would give me more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, whether at an upgraded apartment at Pinewood Acres, in a place of my own, or eventually with Vanessa in Oregon. The choice was mine now. My life was mine again. And that, I realized, was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not just the house or the money, but the right to determine my own path, to be seen and respected as a person with agency and dignity. 1 year later, I stood in the garden of my new apartment, a ground floor unit in a small complex not far from Pinewood Acres. The spring flowers were in full bloom, daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, their colors bright against the fresh green of new leaves. I had planted them myself the previous fall, my first act of permanence in this new home. After selling the house to Tessa and Marcus, I had stayed at Pinewood Acres for another 6 months, taking my time to decide what I wanted next. Vanessa had renewed her invitation for me to come live with her in Oregon, and I had seriously considered it. But in the end, I chose to remain in New York, close to the community I had built, and to my growing relationship with little Eleanor, my namesake. My new apartment was small, but perfect for my needs. 1 bedroom, a cozy living room, a kitchen where I could cook for myself again, and most importantly, the garden. I had forgotten how much I loved having my hands in the soil, nurturing growing things. It connected me to Richard, who had always been the gardener in our family, and to my own mother, who had taught me the names of flowers when I was a child. Iris visited often, though she had chosen to remain at Pinewood Acres. Too much work, a whole apartment, she had declared when I invited her to consider moving to the same complex. Besides, someone has to keep fighting for better desserts in the dining hall. We still met weekly for our book club, which had expanded to include several members from the wider community, including Tessa, who brought baby Eleanor to the meetings. My relationship with Garrett remained a work in progress. The breach had been too deep, the betrayal too profound, for things to ever return to what they had been. But we were finding a new way forward, based on honesty and respect, rather than the paternalism that had characterized our relationship in the years after Richard died. He and Diane came for dinner once a month, sometimes bringing their children, my grandchildren, who were teenagers now, and initially awkward around the grandmother they barely knew. But kids are adaptable, and soon they were visiting on their own, especially my granddaughter Sophie, who shared my love of books and gardening. Vanessa and her children came for extended visits during school breaks, and I spent a month in Oregon each summer, getting to know my daughter's life there, her friends, her beautiful gardens. We talked about me moving there permanently someday, when I was older and perhaps needed more help. But for now, I valued my independence too much to give it up. As I tended my garden that spring morning, I heard the gate open behind me. Turning, I saw Khalid, who had remained my friend and occasional driver long after our initial Uber ride. "Good morning, Eleanor," he called, holding up a bakery box. "I brought those pastries you like." I smiled, brushing the dirt from my hands. "Perfect timing," I said. "The kettle just boiled." We had fallen into this routine, Saturday morning tea in my garden, when the weather permitted, at my kitchen table when it didn't. Khalid was studying for his master's degree in education, and I helped him edit his papers. In return, he kept me connected to the world of a younger generation, their music, their slang, their perspectives on life. As we sat drinking tea and eating pastries, Khalid asked about my plans for the day. "Tessa's bringing Eleanor over this afternoon," I told him. "Marcus has a teacher conference, and she needs to run some errands." I smiled, thinking of the toddler who had become such an important part of my life. "Then Garrett and Diane are coming for dinner. Sophie's bringing her new boyfriend for me to meet." Khalid nodded approvingly. "You're busy," he observed. "That's good." He hesitated, then added, "You seem happy, Eleanor. More than when we first met." I considered his words. Was I happy? Not in the uncomplicated way I had been when Richard was alive, when our children were young, when the future seemed to stretch out endlessly before us. But there was a different kind of happiness now. Deeper, more hard-won, tempered by loss and betrayal, but also by resilience and growth. "I am happy," I said finally, "not because everything is perfect, it isn't, but because I'm living on my own terms again, making my own choices, good or bad." I looked around at my small garden, my modest apartment, the life I had rebuilt from the ashes of what had been taken from me. That's what matters in the end, I think. Not where you live, or how much money you have, but whether you're the author of your own story. Khalid smiled, understanding in his eyes. "And you are," he said, "the author of your own story." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within me. Yes, I was the author of my own story now, and while I couldn't control all the plot twists, age and illness would come for me eventually, as they come for everyone. I could control how I responded to them, how I lived each chapter that remained to me. Later that day, as I watched little Eleanor toddle around my garden, reaching for flowers with chubby hands, I thought about the strange chain of events that had brought us to this moment. If Garrett hadn't forgotten to pick me up from the clinic that day, if I hadn't taken that Uber ride with Khalid, if I hadn't found the courage to return to my old house and discover the truth, my life would be very different now. Smaller, diminished, controlled by others' perceptions of what an elderly woman could or should be. Instead, I had reclaimed my agency, my dignity, my right to determine my own path. I had rebuilt relationships that had been damaged by distance and deception. I had created a new home, a new community, a new purpose for myself. And in doing so, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed, the strength not just to survive betrayal, but to grow beyond it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my garden, I gathered little Eleanor in my arms and pointed to the western sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Look," I whispered, "make a wish." She was too young to understand, of course, but she followed my gaze upward, her eyes wide with wonder at the vastness above us. In that moment, I made my own wish, not for myself, but for her. I wished that she would grow up strong and independent, that she would always know her own worth, that she would never allow anyone to diminish her or make her feel less than the remarkable person she was meant to be. And I wished that, if she ever found herself forgotten or overlooked, she would have the courage to stand up and say, "I am still here, I still matter. This is my life, and I will live it on my own terms." Because that, in the end, is what I had learned from my journey, that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, to assert your dignity, to become the author of your own story. Even when others try to write you out of it, you can pick up the pen and write yourself back in. And in doing so, you might just discover that the final chapters can be the most beautiful of all. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Your support helps me continue creating stories that resonate with viewers like you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when others tried to take away your independence? Share your experiences in the comments below.